Welcome back to the Double Loop Podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. It's your source for everything about fingerprints. While you're doing your comparisons, we'll talk about comparisons. This will be episode 17 of the Double Loop Podcast. So welcome to all of you likable and lazy loop lookers. Thank you, Glenn, for that one. I'm Eric Ray.
And I'm Glenn Langenberg.
And we're still here with a couple of guests from the last episode, Brian Dalrymple and John Norman. So what I wanted to do here real quick, we already talked about a lot about where you guys work, where you guys have been, a lot about fingerprints on skin, but let's back up even further, and I want to hear from you guys how you got started, or how you even got interested in this field of forensics. Like I said, we kind of heard the story of where you've been, especially you, John, as you traveled across England and then all the way over to Canada. But how did you get interested in this topic and decided to make this a career?
I guess the short answer is that Mother Nature has an incredible sense of humor. I went to a university of art and trained in advertising, and just before I entered this field, I was a junior art director for an advertising agency, and I hated that, and I thought the idea of forensics looked good, and I ended up getting a job in an unrelated field with the Ontario Provincial Police. I'm going to avoid the acronym from now on. And
you've learned your lesson, sir.
I know I'm not going to unring that bell, but it was pure luck that an opening in the area came up shortly after I came on board, and it may seem like an unlikely beginning for forensics, but in the art world, I was trained to see and interpret spatial relationships. I was doing 300 or 400 drawings a week in my college days. I also had 4 years of photography, including darkroom, which became very significant. And I also had to prepare high-quality presentation stuff for clients. So all of that dovetailed into. I found I was very comfortable comparing fingerprints. I found that I had no trouble at all making charts for court. So photography, of course, was such a major part of the business. So
what was that first step in the Ontario Provincial Police? What was that first job?
Oh, I was a clerk.
Just a clerk?
Yeah, and I was working a midnight shift, and my fellow worker asked me what I thought my chances were of getting the job in latent prints, as they called it then. And I said, "What job?" And he muttered an expletive and said, "Don't you ever look at the job board?" And I said, "What job board?" He muttered another expletive and then led me down the hall, and I found out that this was Saturday night and the job competition had closed on the previous Friday. And I said, "Oh, I've missed it." And he said, "No." He said, "Just do your application tonight, slide it under the door in personnel. They'll get it Monday, and you'll get an interview." And I got the job.
Oh, that's amazing. Wow, what serendipity.
Well, I've found many times, Glenn, it's better to be lucky than good.
I live by that motto.
And when some years later, 5 years later, I'm lucky enough to have my hunting and fishing buddy next door is also a PhD in small particle chemistry working in research at Xerox. And I had a difficult situation with a fingerprint that would not respond, or rather an exhibit that would not respond to any of the techniques we had in 1976. And I bounced off him the idea of making iodine fluoresce.
And Brian, I'm going to have to ask you, take us back to 1976. What was in your toolbox?
Oh, it was binary. It was ninhydrin and powder, basically.
All right.
And not very long for ninhydrin. That was pretty newfangled stuff because we only got operational in it about a year before that. And before ninhydrin, of course, it was silver nitrate.
Okay.
So I'm sort of pre-Bronze Age in this whole scheme of things. So the exhibits in question were shiny black cardboard boxes that were not amenable to ninhydrin, and they did not work with iodine silver plate transfer. So I thought, if it won't transfer, perhaps we can induce iodine to fluoresce in situ. So Jim Duff became very excited by this, and we both got permission from our respective bosses to play together. And we found that in our research, somebody in 1911 had actually induced iodine to fluoresce, but it proved not to be of any value to us because the Stokes shift is so short that you can't isolate it with a filter. So by that time, Robert Olson had come out with Scott Fingerprint Mechanics, and it was the first time I saw a list of all the stuff that was in fingerprints, all of the possible targets. And I said to Jim, well, is it possible that something in this mess might fluoresce? And so he said, well, we should talk to somebody else. So he took me down the corridor and introduced me to Roland Menzel. And when he heard what we had to say, Roland laughed, and he said, spectroscopists have known for years that one must handle thin layer chromatography plates with great care with gloves, or you will leave fluorescent noise all over them. And
wow.
From that point on, we went into Roland's lab and turned his laser on, and we were seeing fingerprints. It was the most exciting time of my life. And during that time, a colleague from the RCMP contacted me, and he said, I want to pick your brain. I have a very difficult exhibit. It's a piece of black electric tape, and I can see on the sticky side that a finger has touched it, but I have no idea what I can do. I can't use oblique light. It doesn't work. So I said, well, strangely enough, we're working on something new right now. So I took possession of the exhibit, and we got permission to use the laser at Xerox. And when we examined that under laser, there was the faintest orange glow on that indicated portion on the sticky end of the tape. And I photographed it, and to give you an idea how weak it was, the optimum exposure was f8 at 40 minutes. And the exposure at 80 minutes, you would have required a densitometer to see the difference in the two.
Wow.
And again, these were the most exciting times of my life, and that ultimately was identified as a suspect who had not even been charged before, and it changed the case completely. That was the first identification by laser in history, and that the case was completely resolved before the paper was even published early in '77.
Wow. Well, I want to go back to a bunch of this laser stuff, because I know you have a couple of more stories about how you moved from using Xerox's laser to getting one of your own. But I want to hear John's early days in the field and beginnings of his interest in forensics.
Well, my interests go back to in the 60s when I was in an organization called the Boys Brigade. It's similar to what you have here, the Scouts. And a person from the RUC, which was then the Royal Ulster Constabulary in Northern Ireland, it's now called the Northern Ireland Police Service, but a person called John Berry. Have you ever heard of him, Greg? Sorry, Glenn?
Yeah. I mean, John's was around for years, and I had seen a lot of his presentations on uniqueness in nature.
Well, that's right. And John Berry came and gave us a talk one night in our Boys Brigade, and I was certainly interested in it. As I say, John Berry was actually, from what I can remember, was English, but he was in the Royal Ulster Constabulary. He was one of the founders of the Fingerprint Society.
Correct.
And
right.
the Fingerprint
exactly.
World. In fact, I think he was the editor of the Fingerprint World magazine
for many years. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, he certainly grabbed my interest in this profession, in fingerprint identification. Anyway, quite a few years later, as historically there was a lot of terrorism problems in Northern Ireland, and I mean they were really bad at the late 60s, early 70s. They were really bad. My parents, who were English, really wanted to move back to England because of these terrorism problems. Anyway, I saw this advert in the London Evening Standard, and it was for fingerprint officers at Scotland Yard. And I remembered the presentation from John Berry, and I thought, hey, that sounds good. And plus, I could move to London. And I moved from a village of 1,400 people to London with with 10.5 million in the Greater London area.
Wow!
So that's how I applied for the job at Scotland Yard, but I waited a long time for security clearance because, of course, coming from Northern Ireland, they had to do a very long and involved security check on myself and my family, obviously, with the terrorism problems. So that's how I got started at Scotland Yard, and then I was there for close to 3 years. And as you well know, Glenn, if you've been to London, it's very, very expensive to live there. Property's very expensive. I then transferred to the Greater Manchester Police. I married in between, and of course the properties in the north of England were a lot cheaper, and my ex-wife was from the north, so that's when I moved up to Greater Manchester.
Now, that initial job at Scotland Yard, was that comparing latent prints right away?
Well, what it was a pretty extensive training course on not just on the Henry system, but on the Batley system. And we started, searching 10 prints. And you'd search 10 prints for 6 months. And then you were, obviously, if you were suitable, you would then went on to single fingerprint searches. And then after 2 years, you would then be, if gone through the whole process successfully, you would then start to visit scenes of crimes. But in those days, and I'm not sure what it is now, you could not give evidence on fingerprint identification until you had a minimum of 5 years experience within a fingerprint bureau. And not only that, anybody that went out to scenes of crime, they were all experts at Scotland Yard and at Manchester. In other words, we had more than 5 years experience before we even went to scenes. So that I know that has changed a lot throughout the world, and I'm sure it has changed in the UK now.
Really so interesting to hear all the beginning stories of how people got into the profession. I know Glenn and I, we talked in some of the early episodes of the Double Loop podcast about how we each got involved in forensics and started at our agencies, and it continues to amaze me, even talking with Alice and with the guys here, of how different everyone's experience is of getting into this field.
Yeah, very few of us said, you know what, when I grow up, I want to be a fingerprint examiner.
That's right. That's right.
And some of us will never give it up. But obviously, Glenn, you've moved on to bigger and better things, but you'll still always be a fingerprint examiner at heart, right?
I still do fingerprint examinations.
And you always will, right?
Yes.
Yeah. All right, so getting back to the topic on lasers, you've told a few stories this week in the class, but eventually you stopped going over to the Xerox building to use their laser and got one for yourself at the Ontario Provincial Police, right?
We did. I would just like to interject with one thing here that I think is really thought-provoking to me, at any rate. There was a program some 20-odd years ago or more from the UK called Connections by a guy named James Burke. And it was fascinating to me because he would link things in history like the development of armor with the spice trade and the opening of the stock market and so on, how everything in life is connected. And I think there were two major connections that were sort of simultaneous with our serendipitous experiment with lasers. The first thing was that this was one of the very first times that I've been able to find where really comprehensive research was done in the area of fingerprints by people with university education in physics and chemistry. Traditionally, that had been the domain of police officers, and with no disrespect intended, a lot of their research was sort of at a fairly modest level and carried out when they had the time to satisfy their curiosity. So I really think that this was one of the first times that people with formal backgrounds in science got involved, and it just because I had a neighbor with a PhD, that's how it started, and without that might not have happened. But the other thing concurrent to that is that pretty much to my satisfaction in terms of the research I've been able to do, it's also the first time that we in the fingerprint business used luminescence as a detection strategy, where everything previous to that was all about staining. So silver nitrate was a stain, ninhydrin was a stain, powders are a stain, either black on white or white on black, and they have a very limited or a fixed dynamic range. But Roland in particular and I had a lot of talks about this, and you just basically said that it is exponentially more sensitive to use luminescence as your detection strategy than simply staining something, particularly when you're looking for things that are typically less than a nanogram in size. And so how has that shaken out? Well, I'm just amazed, and I'm almost stunned, and I'm certainly humbled when I see the people who have been involved, and certainly I have to, make exceptions, because Terry Kent in the UK and some of his colleagues were involved for a long period of time. I'm not sure when he got started, but certainly in our country there was virtually no research being done at that kind of level. And I immediately was contacted by a fellow who became one of my dearest friends, and that's Joseph Almog. And he ultimately went on to research ninhydrin analogs after finding out that in North America we actually did get good luck with ninhydrin. Mm-hmm. And so I just look at the way the people trained in post-secondary physics and chemistry have just caused an explosion in technology. Glenn, you asked what was in our toolbox in 1976, and essentially two techniques and maybe one or two niche techniques for specific things. But now all you have to do is look in any supplier's catalog, and you're looking at dozens of techniques. Right. And many of these have not just accidentally, but have been intentionally exploiting luminescence as the detection strategy. So those are the connections I've seen.
Yeah, and while we have Eric here, what is your feeling about fluorescent powder, Brian?
Oh yeah, let me comment on that. That stuff, the big use we had for that was when we had kids in for tours, and we got lots of oohs and ahs. But the fluorescence powder as actually an operational tool, in my experience, it would work on goober prints, liberally bolstered with applications to ears and nose, as long as they weren't more than 11 seconds old. Perhaps somebody else had a better one. Huh?
Oh, I'm sorry. So you would just recommend black and white powder, of course.
In general, I don't, and I say in general because I always stand ready to be corrected, but in general, I prefer other methods of use than powder, even in terms of the fluorescent. But the powders of the day, the fluorescent powders of the day were, in my experience, horrible.
Yeah.
Certainly
I
a
don't know
lot
that
has
they're
been
any
done
better
since
today.
then, but then they were horrible.
Yeah, I don't know that they're any better today.
I haven't been involved in scene examinations where powder was sort of the only option for large immovable areas, and I think in terms of powder, my own diagnosis and triage process tells me that there's always something better. So my experience with lifts is somewhat dated.
Well,
No, but it's a good message, though, is that, I mean, so many examiners do want to, rely on powder, and you are very clear about that, is that if you have the capabilities and the tools, you will be served much better to take advantage of tools in the laboratory such as super glue, dye staining, luminescence, indane dione, etc.
Yeah, exactly.
well, in the last lot of years, Glenn, when I'm going to homicide scenes, I'm not using much powder and lift because my purpose is with the laser examinations of the crime scene. Of course, that's non-destructive. I have numerous homicide scenes, chemically treated walls and other items with first ninhydrin, but recently we've been using indane dione on walls at homicide scenes.
Like painted walls?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how are you heat activating it?
Well, what we're doing, we're using a roller. It's just as if we're putting paint on the wall.
But then are you applying heat at all?
Yeah,
for
dry
development?
iron.
Yeah, a dry iron over the wall, and then we'll examine it with a laser.
Wow.
So as far now, that's not on every occasion because of course it depends on getting permission from the case manager to do that, because it does leave a bit of a mess, just like ninhydrin does. But as far as lifts, powder and lifts, recently, I can't remember the last time I did a powder lift because, as you know, Glenn, we've got a large province to cover. So if I'm going there primarily for the laser, or I'm going primarily for footwear and tire track, I'm only there for a few days. The powder would be the last thing that the local ident unit would use at the scene before the scene was handed back.
It's interesting about John bringing up the indane dione on the walls. I was actually teaching a class at the police college in Ontario, and my cell phone rang in the middle of the lecture, and it was one of John's colleagues who was actually at a homicide scene, and he said, I've got a painted bedroom wall here. Do you think there would be any point in putting indane dye on it? And I said, yeah, I think that's a brilliant idea. And he did that and later sent me some of the results, and he got some beautiful prints off the wall.
Wow.
And that was visualizing those with the laser.
Yes,
yeah. And,
absolutely.
So the lasers now are a little more portable, definitely other than what you guys started with. So what did you guys start with? What was the first one you got into the lab?
Well, the one that I saw at Xerox, Roland Menzel's laser, which was responsible for that very first print we ever saw, plus the first successful case, was an argon ion laser. And these things are more temperamental than a room full of opera singers. They are water-cooled. His laser was 3-phase power, 70 amps per phase, and you basically had to be a laser technician to keep the thing running. And it would be like sort of owning a vintage British sports car. You really need to know a lot about mechanics to keep it on the road.
What was the power level of that laser output?
I believe Roland's was 10, and we immediately upon the successful case that was done on his laser, my force told me that the money was there to buy a laser, so we had to put it out to tender. And after the tender process, I was sort of upset with the two main laser manufacturers, who were sort of the Ford and GM of lasers, I thought they had a unique opportunity to be in on the ground floor of a brand new technology. And Roland expressed a similar disappointment, saying that what they should have done is given us one on indefinite loan. But at any rate, they allowed a third manufacturer to come in and beat them on tender price. So we were previously thinking we're going to have one of the really good, dependable ones, and this third-party laser turned out to be a nightmare, and it was spent a lot of time down rather than up. And unfortunately, the laser in those days got the reputation of being out of service on a very regular basis. It was a 20-watt laser, and at the time people thought, well, 20 watts, big deal, I got a 100-watt bulb in my kitchen. But 20 watts of laser power is, first of all, extremely dangerous, and secondly, excessive. And what we found is, too, without care, you could easily burn evidence. So we know now that was just not the way to go, but you have to go through this evolutionary process of barking your shins.
We had a guy in our lab who, when we were operating, or we were doing some maintenance on the laser, and he probably shouldn't have been in this condition, but he had taken off one of the guards, and it's a 10-watt laser, but it was basically the full 10 watts, and he got just a little bit too close with like a polyester rayon shirt to the laser light, and it caught fire. And we put that shirt up on the wall for quite some time.
Well, and I was telling Brian and John about my brother works at a metal shop, and different application of laser, but runs the laser that does all the metal cutting. And if you've seen any of the fingerprint artwork that I've done with this laser cutter, you can see that that laser will burn right through any kind of stainless steel, aluminum, even copper or wood or plastic. I guess different application of a laser to fingerprints.
Any idea what wattage that laser is for industrial use, Eric?
I forget. I meant to ask my brother this week about what it is, but it is just the size of the machine that this thing runs on is. It would take up an average large fingerprint lab. It would take up the entire lab. This machine, just the footprint of this machine.
Well, yeah, our first laser, the plasma tube was 9 feet long. The power supply was roughly the size of a pulpit in a church, and the plug in the wall was 5 inches in diameter. And of course, it had to be hooked up to the water system, and you had to maintain a level of water flow and temperature, or it had a safety interlock to turn it off. And we found that, distressingly, the laser would shut itself off every day at 10 o'clock and at noon, and we found out that that's when people were visiting the restroom and going for lunch, and the water level and pressure dropped at those times and shut the laser off. So they had to come in and put in a dedicated line so that we didn't have that interruption.
Now, is this the laser that you eventually installed in a truck?
No.
No, that's several iterations down the road. This first one did not even have fiber optics. It was the naked beam in the room, just a glowing green line, a 1/16 of an inch in diameter, and we would sort of position it or maneuver it by means of small laser mirrors. And to give an idea of the power intensity of this thing, if those mirrors were not scrupulously clean, if they absorbed anything at all, in a nanosecond they would have a hole burned in them. And we were going through 24 mirrors a week. And
wow.
And also, if that naked beam is going across the room and if you've got your protective goggles on, you can't see it. and I have a couple of archival shirts with holes burned in them, which resulted in a little burn on the side of me. And those were good days.
Eric talks about the laser truck there. When Brian became our manager, Brian no longer on a day-to-day basis was going out to scenes with a laser. By now we'd had researched and developed which became our laser truck, and on that laser truck was a 50 kilowatt generator, a water supply. Of course, because we were traveling to the north of the province, we had antifreeze in that water, Glenn, and we had our coherent laser, which we could take by cables. We could take 100 feet away from the truck, and then we had a fiber optic which was 150 foot long, so therefore we could drive up with our truck. And in fact, one of the times, the previous time before we got this truck, we actually went to a scene in Fort Francis. You probably know where that is, Glenn.
Yeah.
Right next to International Falls. I took the laser there, where we borrowed a generator and from the mill, the pulp mill there. But following on from that, when we had this laser truck, we travelled the province with examining scenes with the laser, because of course it's non-destructive. So, but our particular organisation spent a lot of money in the research and development in this truck, and lots of people were interested in copying this truck, and one of them being the FBI. Well, soon after that, some of these other laser companies now starting to manufacture smaller units and the semiconductor lasers that you can just plug into the wall.
YAGs.
The YAG lasers.
Yeah.
And the one we use now is the one we use on these courses, and it's very portable. In fact, I travel on the province. I take it on the OPP plane, but also commercially Air Canada to Winnipeg, and then drive back into Kenora. So, technology has changed. We've gone from a 12-ton truck with a 50 kilowatt generator and water supply. We've now gone to a Pelican case, which I can lift into a plane or lift into a truck.
But to put that in perspective, when we introduced that mobile crime unit, the 12-ton truck with the 24-foot box and the laser on board with its own cooling system and so on, we could drive that to the middle of a farmer's field and do an examination as if we were in our own lab. And I kept our unit statistics for 15 years, and what we found in the first 2 years of operation of the mobile crime unit, we were finding evidence in 40% of the cases that we wouldn't have found without it.
But what we progressed now is from a truck that we could, as long as we had a road we could drive, and I certainly wasn't going to take it on an ice road. It was a 12-ton truck. But now we have the capabilities with the smaller lasers, the portable lasers. Presently, I'm flying into reserves in our far north, Glenn, as you well know, the reserves we have there, which are only accessible by air or ice roads.
And we just had Alice Maceo on a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about the same thing in Alaska. It's the only way to get to some of those remote scenes.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Glenn, but just all the talk about a laser truck, I'm having this image in my head that's probably more G.I. Joe than it actually was.
See, mine was very Simpsons. I was thinking of the professor driving around with a laser. I went Simpsons on that.
Oh, okay. And every time I hear laser, I also can't help but think of sharks with laser beams on their foreheads.
Yes.
Well, on just one note further on the this truck, this 12-ton, 24-foot box truck that housed our first portable laser, we had the thing constructed in Ottawa. It cost approximately $300,000. And as we were driving back to home base in Orillia through Algonquin Park, we almost lost the whole thing when a moose went across the road in front of us.
Wow.
Don't get that problem down here in Arizona.
No.
with the laser, I think almost every lab will have an alternate light source, but having a laser isn't quite as common. So I want you to describe a little bit about the difference between the light output from an alternate light source versus what you get out of this laser.
I'd like to do that. The main advantage of the laser, and you have to remember in time that we went for something like 12 years where there were no alternative light sources, as they were called. It turns out that alternative is not a terribly accurate term, and my colleague in Canada, Della Wilkinson, many years ago said we should be calling these things forensic light sources. So because of the fact that the laser was bulky, unreliable in terms of its power and water cooling and so on, and just not portable, the search for an alternative began almost immediately. And when first the Lumilite in Canada, and then about 2 years later the Polylite from Australia were introduced, this opened up the world of luminescence examination to a lot more forces, because not only was it portable, it was a lot cheaper. However, in the words of Al Gore, this became an inconvenient truth, because it is not an alternative, it is a complement. The laser is monochromatic, meaning one wavelength. So if you are operating with the argon laser at 514.5, there's no 515 and there's no 513. It is one surgically precise wavelength at very great intensity. If you compare that to the output of a filtered lamp, you're looking at, in the case of a 450 filter, you're looking at a third of the spectrum, because it peaks at 450 and runs from 4 to 500 roughly. If you're looking at 505, which is possibly the second most popular output, it's a 40 nanometer bandwidth. So what we found, and we found this with colleagues across the world, each of these sources has the potential to find something that the other one missed. With the LED sources and the filtered sources, you have an incredible versatility. You can select slices of the spectrum ranging from UV to IR and find things that may be located only by that source. On the other hand, the laser is a one-trick pony. It's a pretty good trick, but it has one wavelength. You don't tune it, at least not the current model, which is 532 nanometers. But what we do find is that it is a much more sensitive source for detecting inherently fluorescing fingerprints than any of the other broadband sources. So the inconvenient truth of all this is, if you're not using both, you're probably missing stuff.
One of the students here this week was looking at what the laser can do and was really impressed, and she was trying to come up with an analogy to take back to her agency to try to sell them on the idea of, hey, we need to look into getting this laser. And what we came up with was, well, if you're going to talk to cops, then you got to talk about guns. So the analogy that we came up with was, well, the forensic light source, or these more broadband spectrums, are like bringing a shotgun, while the laser is much more of a sniper rifle, getting right in on that one wavelength.
Yeah, and that is actually a very good analogy that I've used myself in the past. And when you think about it, they're both firearms, and they have a certain level of overlap in that there are certain things that they both will do. But this is an analogy that may apply only to either a police officer or a hunter, but you wouldn't go moose hunting with number 6 shot in a shotgun, and you wouldn't go duck hunting with a 30-06.
That is true.
And Glenn would know that because you've got some of those up on the wall.
Yeah, those are coming down, though. We don't have as many hunters in the latent print section. It's dwindling. Okay. It's dwindling these days. Yeah. Yeah, losing our hunters.
All right. Well, Glenn, do you have anything else you wanted to ask Brian or John while we have them here on the show?
Well, I was sort of curious about what they're excited about in emerging research. I mean, you mentioned a lot of big players there early, Brian. You mentioned Yossi Almog and, the Australians and Della Wilkinson and, a lot of other researchers that I know you're a part of, a group of researchers who are have dedicated their careers and lives to the development, enhancement of latent prints. And I'm curious about some of the emerging work that either you, John, or any of those people are doing that you could talk about for a moment.
Well, my old buddy Yossi Almog is always working on new stuff, and he is exploring the big area of nanotechnology. And I've listened to that at the last few IFRG meetings, for one. And
you should probably tell the listeners what an IFRG meeting is.
The IFRG is the International Forensic Research Group, and it is composed of people in leading positions of research and operations from around the world, and it's actually like a family. The personal relationships are every bit as important as the professional ones, and I'm very honored to have been included in the group. And there are some extremely heavy, they are the heavy hitters in our business from around the world. And I always come away feeling rejuvenated, having been exposed to the new things that are on the horizon. And nanotechnology is one of them. Another one that I look forward to with great interest, and I must be honest, a little bit of trepidation, is the introduction of the probability models in terms of how we in the fingerprint world express our findings. And I guess I was something of an old dog, slow to change, but I now accept the, how shall I put it, not only the inevitability, but the need for this to take place, and I'm very curious to watch this taking shape over the next number of years in the everyday work of people comparing fingerprints. So that's a very big thing that I'm looking forward to, Glenn.
I think I would reiterate there as well, Glenn, and as you well know, we were all in that committee together. And
which committee was that for the listeners?
The Standardization Committee for the International Association of Identification. And
right.
I remember, the very first meeting we had, Christophe Champeau, yourself, and Paul Chamberlain obviously were supporters of these probability models. And I must admit, I was a doubter at the very beginning, as you well know. We had a few conversations, not only in the meeting, but after with some refreshments. And yes. I must admit, Glenn, I was a doubter, but as I listened to your learned colleagues and yourself, I must admit it certainly opened my eyes, and I'm not a doubter anymore. And I still have some apprehension about actually, when these models are validated, actually using them and giving that evidence in court. But that's another conversation. But it's certainly exciting. There's no doubt about that. And actually, where are we with the validation?
Well, yeah, because the Forensic Science Service in the UK, the FSS, which had done the most work to
yes.
date on the model, I mean, for all intents and purposes, had really published a great validation study. Because they're no longer,
yes.
functioning, this model's not available, and it's a bit, sad to have that, have to step back a bit. However, Cedric Newman has really been working hard in the last couple of years with a private vendor to develop a model, and he's been able to present recently some of his research as he's trying to develop, a model, and he has access to, like 1 million fingerprint reference database now, and he's getting significant support from an APHIS vendor. And I think it's okay to say the name. It's Cogent because he's been presenting, and they're very keen on trying to develop this model, and he's making great strides. But again, he's having to repeat what he's already done before, at FSS, but with this new technology. But it's a setback, but I still think it's not that far away. It is, for some of us, going to be in our futures.
All right, great guys. So I've found this class really valuable in not only seeing new techniques, but then also being able to play with new techniques, with chemistry in all sorts of different applications, and then the different light sources to view that. So what kind of upcoming chemistry and light classes do you guys have available?
There will be a number of chemistry and light classes in New York City. At this point in time, I'm not sure if they will be open enrollment, but there will also be I don't have the date with me at the moment, but sort of somewhere in the first 3 to 4 months of 2014, there will be a chemistry and light class in Denver. I think it's in March. But for more details on this and other upcoming courses, I suggest people go to www.ronsmithandassociates.com, and all of the upcoming classes will be listed there.
All right, great. So hopefully if you're interested, take a look on the website and see what might be coming in your area soon. Thank you very much, Brian and John, for joining us here on the Double Loop podcast. We appreciate you guys sitting down with us and sharing just the wealth of information and history and of where you guys have been through your career, and all the additions that you guys have made to this field. Hopefully the listeners had a good time listening to our little chat here this week and last week. So thank you everyone for sticking around and listening to another episode. We'll be back next week. Don't forget to look for us every Tuesday morning on SoundCloud.com, on iTunes, and on Stitcher. You can make comments to the podcast on SoundCloud, or send us emails at Glenn@EliteForensicServices.com or to Eric@RayForensics.com. So we'll sign off here for another week, and see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Glenn. Good talking to you as usual.
Get some of that snow shoveled, Glenn.
I'll get on it. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
If you're a regular listener to the Double Loop podcast, you've heard about the new 3-day class on exclusions from Eric Ray and Penny Deckant. Well, we've decided that our new, improved, longer version of this class needed a new name: Exclusionology, Standards in Reducing Errors. If your agency is struggling to adapt to the exclusion decision, consider bringing in this class. We'll start at the beginning and work through every aspect of ACE-V from the exclusion perspective. Get more details about exclusionology on EliteForensicServices.com.